Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chris, and on today's video we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about what fragrances are made in the US, what fragrances are made in Europe, and if there's a difference in cost and also quality. This is a fragrance topic that took a lot of research, a lot of looking into things, a lot of digging here and there, and trying to figure out what sources were actually telling the truth, what sources are not telling the truth, and to figure out which fragrances are going to be better quality, better bang for the buck, and all those sorts of things. One of the biggest things when doing this research was trying to figure out what brands do this, what brands decide to manufacture in the US as well as Europe. Because if you're not aware, Europe, when it comes to manufacturing cosmetics, skincare, fragrances, there are a lot stricter EU regulations that they have to go by. There are over around 250 to 300 banned chemicals in the EU alone. So whenever they're made in European Union established countries, they have to adhere by these rules whenever they are manufactured there. One of the biggest manufacturers for fragrance is obviously the country of France, followed by Spain, Italy, and there's some also made in the UK and other countries. But when I was looking into this, I was like, is there a difference? Are there chemicals that are harmful whenever they're made in the US? Because here in the US, we have the FDA, but it's not that strict. You can kind of get away with a lot of different things with the FDA whenever you're manufacturing fragrances, cosmetics, and things of that sort. So I decided to look into it, try to figure out what fragrances are, the biggest ones that are manufactured here as well as in Europe. And one of the brands that popped up a lot was Chanel. And I remember this when working with Chanel. I worked for Chanel for almost 2 to 3 years, almost 3 years, not quite there though. And it was much said that Chanel was manufacturing, well, it was obviously known that Chanel was manufacturing a lot of their fragrances here in the US. I believe their manufacturing plant is in the state of New Jersey, and it was very famous whenever you worked for Chanel that everyone knew that a lot of the products were being manufactured here. And it was often said to us as employees, to kind of repeat this to everyone, that a lot of the fragrances that were made here as well as other products were done with the same quality and savoir-faire that they were made in the country of France. This is not necessarily true though. After doing research, I kind of figured out that there are a lot of things that change from here to obviously France. One of those being actual raw ingredients. In the US, we tend to substitute raw ingredients for chemical ingredients or synthetic byproducts of those actual ingredients. And what that means, all that fancy talk, is that if you buy, for example, number 5, which number 5 is manufactured both in France and it's actually also manufactured here in the US. The US version, if you read the actual ingredients list, tends to have synthetic versions of certain ingredients. One of those being jasmine from grass. These ingredients are a lot more expensive, obviously, to transport and to actually get in essence form into the country of US. I know some people are going to comment, well, they tend to just ship the essences from the country of France into the US, and that's how they manufacture. Not necessarily true. It would be extremely expensive. It would be extremely costly to do that, and it would have to go through a lot of loopholes to get there, based on my research. Does this mean that the American version of number 5 is less superior to the actual French version? Not necessarily. Doing research, it's kind of a give or take here or there type of situation. If you decide to buy a fragrance that is made in France that is also manufactured in the US, like number 5, Coco Mademoiselle, Chance, what tends to change is you're going to get a more raw experience with the European counterparts. With that being said as well, you're not going to get as much consistency, because if you grow a crop every single year, it's going to change in quality. It's not always going to smell the same. It's not always going to look the same. It's not going to be watered the same. It's not going to have the same temperatures. It's not going to have the same amount of sunlight each and every day of the year. So that's going to make it change ever so slightly maybe, but it will change. It will impact the actual raw ingredient that you're putting into your perfume, which will also impact the consistency of that fragrance. So across the board, it may change just a little bit here and there with the European counterparts. But with that being said, you're getting a deeper version of that fragrance with a lot of nuances, with a lot of character. And that's what makes perfume expensive. That's what makes perfume lovely. That's what gives it its character. It's going to change ever so slightly. I know a lot of people want to go into the store and get the same consistent experience. When you're getting the European versions, you may obviously get the same consistency and the same type of experience, but it's going to change a little bit here or there. Now, the American counterparts, because they do substitute a lot of these raw ingredients for synthetic components, it tends to change a little bit. You start to get more consistency when it comes to the actual smell, the quality of the fragrance, the longevity, because it can all be controlled in a lab. And while this is great, you might think, well, isn't it better to get a synthetic version? You're never going to be able to recreate the actual nuances and what makes each essence special. So with that being said, obviously you are going to get a much different experience with both of them. I have gotten the opportunity to smell 2 different formulations. I have a French No. 5 and I have an American No. 5. While they're both French, one's manufactured here, one's manufactured in France. And I really did get to see that there is quite a bit of difference. The No. 5 from the US is obviously going to have better longevity, better performance. It's going to smell really good, just like No. 5 is known for, but it changes ever so slightly. It's not going to be as ambery. It's not going to be as warm. May Rose and the Jasmine there are not as deep and prevalent in the actual fragrance. When you get the French version, it changes ever so slightly and you start to see little imperfections, that make the fragrance have character. And I think that's what we are all missing in a world where everything is supposed to be streamlined, everything's supposed to look the same. That goes from fruit, that goes from trees, that goes from houses, that goes from cars. We start to forget that the little imperfections in each fragrance make it that savoir-faire. Not to the extent that Chanel's been doing it lately with their handbags falling apart. It's just my opinion. But I will say that the actual fragrances, whenever they have little imperfections in the smell, that's what makes them even better. You may be wondering what fragrances themselves are manufactured here in the US as well as in the country of France or anywhere else in Europe. So I actually compiled a list here that I'm going to give you ones to look out for. I will say this really quickly. It would be really nice if you guys commented down below which fragrances you have seen that are made in France or in Europe, and also the ones that have been made here in the US, and to see if you find a difference like I have, because it's quite fascinating. It's something that, not a lot of people talk about. And I think fragrance is one of those things that's often forgotten. For example, Louis Vuitton manufactures some of their actual leather goods and their handbags here in the US as well as in France. And people tend to not want the American version. It's not necessarily that it's less of a quality product. It's just that it's made differently, if that makes any sense. So let's get into this. So the list of brands that I did research on and figured out that actually have both fragrances manufactured here in the US as well as in Europe are going to be the following. Dior. Now, Dior I was very surprised by because I worked for Dior for a long time. That whole time, believe it or not, I never saw a actual fragrance or a skincare product or a makeup component that was manufactured here in the US. So this was a very big, shocking thing for me because, like I said, I've never seen a made in the US stamp on any product. But Dior is listed as one of them. And according to research, Dior Sauvage is one of the ones that is manufactured here in the US as well as in Europe, or in the country of France, I should say. Miss Dior as well. I was trying to figure out which exact Miss Dior is manufactured here, but I could not find the actual source for that. J'adore, I think, obviously, because it's a very famous and iconic fragrance, they have to move production from France to the US. The other one that we have listed here is also Dior Homme. None of the actual La Collection Privée fragrances are listed as being manufactured here in the US, as well as being manufactured in the country of France. So that's good. Again, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily best, but you're going to get more raw ingredients in those fragrances that are going to give you that higher quality. The next brand that I have listed here are, well, there's a couple here that are going to be L'Oreal brands, one of those being Yves Saint Laurent. Yves Saint Laurent has some of their production here in the US. Well, technically it's L'Oreal's production. We also get some from Lancôme, which is another L'Oreal brand. And we also have Prada, which is an Italian brand, but it's also manufactured and distributed by L'Oreal. And yeah, not surprising. I think L'Oreal is such a big company and they pump out so many products each and every year that it would be hard for them to ship everything out of one country and one region. Does it make it less expensive? Probably not, but it is the rule of economies of scale. They obviously have to move production to make it a little bit easier for them to get the product to store and to launch, obviously. The next one we have, which I was shocked by, because I have worked for this brand as well, Tom Ford. And I have never seen a Tom Ford product made in Europe. I don't know where they got this from. I was researching it. I mean, apparently at some point they did manufacture some of their actual products. I should say a fragrance. In regards to fragrance, I have never seen a Tom Ford product made somewhere else. Comment down below if I'm incorrect and if you have one that's made in Europe. But I have always seen them made in the USA. And I mean, it kind of shows, if you know what I mean. I have seen some of their actual skincare products and some of their actual cosmetics made in Switzerland and Germany, but I have never seen a perfume from Tom Ford made in the US. But it is listed here. We also have Guerlain, another very luxurious French house. It does not list exactly which fragrances are manufactured here, but I would assume it's the popular ones like L'Homme Idéal and Mom Guerlain, as well as Shalimar. I'm assuming, again, that these are the ones that are manufactured in the US as well, but it doesn't state. Hermes was a big surprise to me. Hermes is listed also as a fragrance brand that does manufacture here in the US as well as in France. Hermes being such a high prestigious brand, it's a little bit of a shock to see them on this list. Yes, they're as big as Dior. Yes, they're as big as Chanel, but they're not quite to the level. They're not known for being such a large manufacturing brand, if that makes any sense. They are more known for their savoir-faire and their know-how. And finally, we have Givenchy, not a surprise, another LVMH brand, as well as Calvin Klein, which would be under Coty, which Coty is the manufacturer of Calvin Klein fragrances. So those are the brands to look out for. You know, again, that does not mean that the actual American counterparts are going to be worse than the French ones. It's just research that I wanted to figure out, because if I have the question, I assume you have the question as well. And I did figure out that obviously there are going to be differences. Some of them are going to be trade-offs. Some of them are not going to be so bad. Let me know if you're interested in figuring out with me if some of the ingredients that are used here in the US in fragrances are harmful to us or if they're not, because that's another story. That's a whole nother can of worms that you have to open up to figure out, you know, what chemicals are bad for you, what chemicals are good for you, and all that sort of thing. So comment down below what you thought of this video. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more fragrance related content. Thank you so much for watching today's video, you guys. I really appreciate you, and until next time, take care.